Mindanao has been belatedly sutured into the national narrative by virtue of its state as an unconquered island at the crucial point of the birth of the nation at the turn of the last century. Its Moro and Lumad population relatively insulated from the effects that colonialism brought to the local economy. The American colonial period brought in the massive transformations to Mindanao's social and economic landscape by way of a successful resettlement program that achieved in a relatively short period of time what the Spaniards were not able to realize for more than 300 years: the colonization of Mindanao's economy and its people. This systemic appropriation of land and resources that follow thereafter is at the root of the conflict that continues to plague the southern island. The logging, cattle raising, agricultural plantations, and finally mining established in various parts of Mindanao, first by American business interests, then later assumed by sections of the Filipino elite, caused the integration of the Mindanao economy to the demands of the global economic order.
In all these changes, the constant feature is the displacement of original inhabitants of the island, the Moro and the Lumad populations. So this is the historical and political economic context of their marginalization. Such historical and systematic marginalization has become particularly worse in recent times for the Lumad. What has been taking place is, in fact, a war of extinction as the mechanism of the state through its armed forces and paramilitary groups are now poised to trample over resisting indigenous communities and dividing their unity in order to open up areas to the unmitigated plunder of profitable resources. Lumad situations are go beyond experiencing institutional arrangement that disadvantage them. This argues that the situation of the Philippines indigenous peoples is far worse than what the concept structural discriminations implies. There is an ongoing war of extinction that seeks to displace and uproot indigenous communities from their ancestral land in mining and large-scale agricultural plantations. So, what does it mean to be a Lumad in this day and age? To be a Lumad in this day and age also requires them to confront the war of extinction being waged by the state, apart from the structural discrimination that they face.
What do you call the systemic state-backed efforts to drive them away from their ancestral lands in the name of foreign-backed mining and agricultural expansion in the guise of counterinsurgency? Are these not wars of extinction? In the past years, the Lumad have been experiencing a host of human rights violations in the hands of paramilitary groups and state forces. There has been a relentless attack by these groups on indigenous schools, indigenous communities, and indigenous leaders. In 2015, the Manilakbayan ng Mindanao, a consortium of groups, published a brochure detailing the dire situation of Lumad communities all over Mindanao, Manilakbayan ng Mindanao, 2015.
In 2015, 87 Lumad schools all over Mindanao are threatened with closure and 3 have ceased operating in tragic and harrowing circumstances, throwing more than 1,000 indigenous children out of school. More than 95 cases of attacks against schools have been recorded within the first 3 quarters of the year 2015. A school named after slain anti-mining and Italian priest Father Fausto Pap Stentorio, operated by the Mindanao Interfaith Services Foundation in Barangay White Kulaman, Kitaw-Tao, Bukidnon, have been harassed by village officials prodded by the Philippine military. It was forcibly closed at October 23, 2015 at 10 a.m. by armed men who barged into the school where 24 students and teachers were holding classes. They destroyed the gate and began demolishing the school in front of the indigenous children coming from the Pulangion and Matigsalog tribes and their volunteer teachers, leaving them in great trauma and shock.
Michelle Campos, 17 years old when this picture was taken, is the daughter of slain Lumad leader Dionel Campos. Commenting on the murder of her father, together with a fellow Manobo leader Belo Sinso and Emerito Samarca, the executive director of Al-Qadev, she expressed in a mass action that the peace that the government wants is the peace of the graveyard so that mining interests can freely encroach on Manobo ancestral domain. These are the bodies of Emer Sumina, 17 years old, Wilmer Sumina, 19 years old, Norman Samia, 14 years old, Herminio Samia, 70 years old, who is half-blind and could barely walk, and Jobert Samia, 20 years old, brought down from the massacre site to the town center of Mindis, Pangantukan. They are all Manobo farmers mowed down by elements of the 1st Special Forces Battalion last August 18, 2015, after they were accused of being NPA rebels.
In the early hour of November 12, 2015, armed men burned down another school serving Manubu High School children in Padiay, Sibagat, Agusan del Sur, where the volunteer teachers were housed as well. Such generator set, books, school supplies were kept razed down to the ground. It is an extension of Alternative Learning Center for Agricultural and Livelihood Development, or ALCADEV, serving indigenous youth from the Manubo, Banwaanon, Higaunon, Talaandig, and Mamanwa tribes. In last September 1, 2015, the most tragic incident involving systematic attack against indigenous schools occurred the closure of ALCADEV. Alternative Lumad Learning Institution was precipitated by the public execution of the school's executive director, Emerito Samarca, and indigenous leader, Dionel Campos and Belo Senzo, refers to Magahat Bagani. The two leaders showed execution style in front of whole community, while the body of Samarca, who was later found in the classroom. Also, there is attack against indigenous leaders. In the 6 years of Aquino administration, a total of 71 indigenous leaders have been victims of extrajudicial killings. 56 is a great book of these Lumad leaders from Mindanao. Even children are not spared from climate infanities prevailing in indigenous area terrorized by paramilitaries. Armed men believed to be members of Bilaman group shot to death Alaking Ulingan, a 15-year-old from Talaandig tribe, and Obed Pabanya, while undertaking daily economic activities in the forest of St. Peter, Malabalay City, Bukidnon, last September 15, 2016.
In another case, the sole witness to the Pangantukan massacre last August 18, 2015, and there was targeted
violence agent indigenous leaders and communities. During Aquino administration, 71 leaders killed, mainly Lumad leaders from Mindanao, children also victim. Magandugan massacre show indiscriminate target climate of impunity displaced over 40,000 indigenous persons. Human rights violation, kills, harassment, armed force occupation, dry living condition, and evacuation center lead to illness, disease, and deaths. Successful campaigns facilitate returns of displaced individuals. Specific incidents like Pakibato District massacre highlight brutality. Multiple deaths include church leaders and patient association members urging action needs for safety of indigenous communities amid ongoing violence and right abuses.
In Misamis Oriental was evacuation of 52 families from 2 barangay of municipality of Lagonglong after the military also encamped inside civilian home. They established an evacuation camp at the provincial ground in Cagayan de Oro City last June 4, 2015 to dramatize their flight and have managed to return home. After a month, when the military finally vacated their communities, In 2015, a similar situation took place at the provincial capital ground of Bukidnon in Malaybalay City. Last June 11, 2015, the whole Higaonon community of Dalakutan, Cabanglasan left their homes to encamp at the capital ground to decry the killing of community leader Prini Landasan and the harassment they have been experiencing from the Dilamansi paramilitary group. Then there is the news of Salugpungan, Tatano Igkanungun Community Learning in the center of MISFI Academy School being closed by no less than Department of Education upon the concluding of the military. They intended to replace their school with institutions that are run by soldiers acting as fire teacher, which prompted no less than Senator Marian Santiago to point out the patent violation of the Constitution of such a plan. Plans call are zone of peace which disallow armed groups, most especially state forces, to enter and meddle into their affair. The 146 Lumad School all over Mindanao, Maniklakbayan ng Mindanao, have been the rallying point and source of unity of many indigenous community against different forms of development, aggression threatening their way of life. It is obvious that reason why these schools are being targeted is because the perpetrators want to weaken, if not break up, the Lumad communities. What is the common thread that ties this coordinated attack on indigenous school leaders and communities? These remote areas where these schools, indigenous leaders, and their communities are located happen to be rich in mineral deposit or are prime areas for mining or agricultural expansion. These indigenous communities also happen to declare the opposition to the entry of this extractive industry that they know will alter their traditional ways of living and eventually drive them away from their ancestral lands. The attack on school, indigenous leaders, and communities are a violent attempt to weaken the resolve of communities to resist the entry of these destructive extractive industries. Closing down the school will result to weakening of the indigenous community, many of whom come together and congregate on the basis of the shared desire to provide for the education of their children.
Who are the perpetrators of these vile, sinister acts? In the Philippines, there is the phenomenon of the proliferation of paramilitary groups, many of whom are composed of indigenous members. They are further given legality to operate under Executive Order Number 264 in the guise of creating community-based counterinsurgency units. These indigenous paramilitary groups now push for ancestral domain claims involving thousands of hectares that the head claimants consequently offer to mining and agricultural corporations. In many cases, local government officials and the military act as brokers of these business interests. What provides motive and fuels this madness in Mindanao? It is the lucrative potential for mining development. 500,000 hectares of Mindanao is covered by mining concessions. It is an island that has extremely valuable mineral reserves relative to other nations. It is fourth in copper reserves, third in gold, fifth in nickel, and sixth in chromite deposits in the world. The prospect of mining development and agricultural enterprises expansion is so powerful that this create the conditions for the relentless attack on indigenous communities in the southern Philippine island of Mindanao. Last 31st of August 2015 to the 2nd of September 2015, a solidarity mission was undertaken by 200 individuals from different religious congregations, cause-oriented groups, and human rights organizations in Barangay Mindis, Pangantukan, Bukidnon. The mission was able to document the massacre of the 5 unarmed Manobo farmers as well as a host of other human rights violations from testimonies gathered on the ground. The details gathered corroborate the testimony of the sole survival witness, the 15-year-old son of Herminia Samia, the 70-year-old nearly blind man who could barely walk, who was accused of being a rebel and subsequently peppered with bullets by the army soldiers. The guilt and impunity of the 1st Special Forces Battalion were confirmed by the harassment experienced by the participants of the Solidarity Mission. Agents in plain clothes monitored the activities and took pictures of the participants. When the mission was about to exit the community, they set up a roadblock and forced participants to sign their name in a logbook. Days after, the communities, especially the relatives of the Pangantukan Five, were gripped by fear as an armed personnel carrier and 2 military vehicles filled with soldiers encamped on the barangay hall of Mendiz, Pangantu.
Carl Gaspar in 2000 makes a number of important arguments in his land bank work, The Lumad's Struggle in the Face of Globalization. He traces how the fate of the Lumad as a marginalized and dispossessed people can be traced historically to both the colonial and neo-colonial periods, political economic features, and their powerlessness in bound to continue unless these deep-seated social configurations are challenged. It thus seemed inevitable that what began in the post-1946 scenario would continue through the post-1986 period. Despite the promise of people power, the indigenous people remain powerless. The grip of neocolonialism on the country's mode of production, the political economy, the reins of the government, the business conglomerates, the landlord clique, and on the majority of the Filipino people has become tighter, if anything. In the march of modernity towards abundant rational societies, it is given that the global economic system will relegate certain geographic sectors as sources of raw materials. It is through this arrangement that they are able to siphon off from the West much of the wealth and abundance that is now in display in the first world, leaving many of these neo-colonies as showcases of great poverty, or if there is apparent wealth, scandalous inequality. There are two predicaments inherent to capitalism according to Harvey's analysis, following Rosa Luxemburg, apart from the problems of underconsumptions, which is related to the phenomenon of overproduction, wherein there are more goods produced for existing markets to absorb. There is also the problem of overaccumulation, which responds to the lack of opportunities for profitable investment of accumulated capital.
True primitive accumulation is a process that some have considered a historical phase through which societies pass on the way to more fully proletarian-sized social structure based on expanded Glassman 2016, as cited in it is this context that the Lumad can be seen as the contemporary victims of capital violent for cheaper raw materials to raise the rate of private accumulation, especially in the periodic capitalist crisis of overproduction and overaccumulation. The drive to conquer new frontiers where the indigenous communities reside has been the recourse of transnational and their local counterparts.
This important political economic angle has not been given emphasis in current discourse regarding the Lumad and indigenous people. They have been idealized as repositories of non-existent and idealist pre-modern cultura, true when in the fact they are the most contemporary showcase of the economic and political violence of global capital made possible through the facilitation of their local agents.
In the contemporary period, accumulation by disposition take place in the context of the onslaught of a rapacious global neoliberal order pressuring new colonies to submit to their demand, in this case of the Philippines. The acquiescence of a pliant political elite that has been ideologically captured by the same forces. The contemporary Philippine state is the nexus of all these forces that make all this happen. David Harvey Wright. The primary vehicle for accumulation by disposition, therefore, has been the forcing open of market throughout the world by institutional pressure exercised through the IMF and WTO, backed by the power of the United States and to a lesser extent Europe, to deny access to its own vast market to those countries that refuse to dismantle their protection.